The night the desert winds carried a woman's cry across the stone cliffs. Nashkahi Graywolf knew something was coming for him, something that would break the quiet life he had spent 9 long years building in the shadows, for almost a decade. He had lived alone at the edge of the Black Mesa Canyons, far from tribes, far from white towns, far from any soul who might recognize the tragedies that carved themselves into his face. The old log cabin he built with his bare hands stood like a scar against the red earth. In daylight, it blended with the land. At night, it felt like a tomb, and he had chosen it that way. But the cry riding the wind that night was not the cry of a wounded animal or a traveler seeking help. It was human, sharp with fear. And fear always came with a price. Nashkahi stepped out of his cabin, the wood floor creaking under his heavy boots. Moonlight painted the canyon in silver streaks as he scanned the dark ridges. His horse, Weya, shifted anxiously, ears twitching toward the south ravine. That's when he heard hoofbeats fast. Desperate and familiar, a rider burst from the canyon trail, dust spiraling behind him. Even before the man reached the yard, Nashkahi recognized his silhouette. Tako. His boy, not by blood but by choice. Takoda had been 16 when Nashkahi took him in, half-starved, wild-tempered, and carrying more rage than most grown men. Now at 25, he rode with a confidence that made Nashkahi both proud and uneasy. However, tonight, the confidence was gone. Takoda leaped from his horse before it fully stopped, breath ragged, eyes burning with urgency. "Father," he said, only using that word when something was truly wrong. "I need your help." Nashkahi's jaw tightened. "What trouble follows you?" Takoda didn't answer. Instead, he turned and lifted someone from his saddle, someone wrapped in a dark wool blanket, a woman, her long black hair spilled like ink over Takoda's arm, her braid undone, her face pale beneath streaks of dust. She wore traditional Apache clothing, deerskin dress decorated with turquoise beads but torn, as if someone had grabbed her, dragged her, tried to restrain her. A thin trail of dried blood marked her forehead. Nashkahi's pulse shifted. This was no simple rescue. "Who is she?" he asked. Takoda held the woman closer, his voice low. "Her name is Sahale, daughter of Elder Nandan of the Whitestone Band." Nashkahi froze. Whitestone was a distant tribe, peaceful, proud, private. He had not seen any of them in years. And what happened to her? Takoda swallowed hard. She was taken by a group of renegade ranchers, the same gang that's been stealing horses and trapping families along the river trail. Nashkahi's eyes flashed. He thought those men had been chased off months ago. Takoda continued, "I found her tied in their camp. They were planning to sell her. I cut her free, but they fired at us as we escaped." Nashkahi lowered his gaze to the woman Sahale. Her breathing was shallow. A bruise darkened her cheek. She was older than most women caught in such nightmares, perhaps 30, and something in her stillness felt different. Not fragile, not broken, just waiting. Nashkahi motioned toward the cabin. "Bring her inside." Takoda carried her in as Nashkahi lit a lantern. The warm glow revealed the fine lines around her eyes, the slight tremble in her hands, the faint scar on her jaw, signs of a life lived with wisdom and battle. He fetched herbs, water, and clean cloths, preparing to tend her wounds. As they worked, Takoda finally spoke again. "There's more." Nashkahi didn't look up. "Say it." "They followed me." Silence swallowed the room. "How many?" "4. Maybe 5. Armed and angry." Nashkahi dropped the cloth into the bowl, the water turning pink. He had lived quietly for years, burying his past, burying his weapons, burying everything that once made him dangerous. But danger had found him again, and it had come carrying the life of a woman who, even unconscious, felt like a storm about to break his mountains wide open. Nashkahi stood tall. "Takoda," he said, gripping his boy's shoulder, "this night changes everything." Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere in the canyon, men were hunting, and inside his cabin lay a woman who would bring every ghost Nashkahi had ever buried back to life. The cabin felt smaller than ever as Nashkahi moved through it with silent purpose, gathering weapons he had not touched in years. A dusted bow, a pair of bone-handled knives, and the old Winchester rifle he once vowed never to lift again. Each piece carried the weight of a life he thought he had left behind. Takoda stood near Sahale, watching Nashkahi with a troubled expression. "Father, I didn't mean to bring danger here. I didn't know they'd chase me this far." Nashkahi shook his head. "You did what was right. You saved a woman who would have been taken across borders and never seen again. That alone is worth whatever comes." Sahale stirred on the bedding as the lantern flickered. A soft sound escaped her lips, a mix of pain and a dream she could not escape. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, searching. Takoda knelt quickly. "Sahale, you're safe. No one will harm you here." Her gaze shifted slowly to him, then to Nashkahi, lingering there. Her voice was raspy. "Where am I?" Nashkahi crouched near her, speaking gently. "My home. You were wounded. Takoda brought you from men who intended you harm." She tried to sit up, but pain caused her to wince. Nashkahi steadied her with a firm hand. "Easy, you've lost strength." Sahale breathed shakily, her eyes full of fear and something deeper, something she had been holding too long. "Those men, they killed our horses, drove us from our summer camp. My father told us to flee, but I stayed behind to gather our sacred items. They found me first." Nashkahi and Takoda exchanged a grim look. Sahale was not simply a lost wanderer. She was tied to a disaster bigger than either of them knew. Takoda's voice was soft. "Your father, Elder Nanton, did he escape?" Sahale swallowed hard. "I don't know. They were shooting. Fires everywhere. I ran." Her voice cracked. "I ran until I couldn't." Nashkahi felt something tug inside him, a sharp memory he wished he could forget. Flames, screams. His own tribe scattered years ago. Loss that never left him. He stood abruptly. "We cannot stay here. Those men will reach these canyons soon." Takoda rose as well. "The trail riders I saw, they were only part of the group. The ranchers have hired guns with them now. Many guns." The lantern flame quivered as if it too felt the danger approaching. Nashkahi stepped to the window and pushed aside the hide curtain slightly. The moon hung low, dipping behind a cliff edge. Shadows stretched long across the desert floor. Something moved far off, but unmistakable. A glint, a shifting silhouette. "A rider. They're closer than I thought," he murmured. Takoda looked alarmed. "Tonight?" "Yes, they know this land. They'll come through the dry wash." He turned, taking charge with a calm he hadn't felt in years. "Takoda, saddle 2 horses. Not Wayashi makes too much noise. Take the Dunmari and the bay." Takoda nodded. "And Sahale?" Nashkahi looked back at the woman, whose breathing had steadied but whose eyes glistened with fear. "She rides with me." Sahale stared up at him, surprised. "You don't even know me." Nashkahi held her gaze. "Danger knows enough. It's coming for you. That's all I need to know." For a moment, something flickered between them, not trust yet, but something like recognition. As if 2 people who had walked separate tragedies suddenly shared the same road of survival. Takoda stepped out to ready the horses while Nashkahi gathered supplies. Water skin, herbs, a blanket, and the rifle wrapped in leather. He hesitated only once, his hand hovering over a carved wooden box. Inside was a ceremonial bone necklace, one he had sworn never to wear again. A reminder of who he used to be, who he tried not to be. But the past was calling. And the past was armed. He opened the box and tied the necklace around his neck. Sahale watched him, her voice a whisper. "You are not a simple man living alone in these canyons." Nashkahi paused. "No, not anymore." A sharp whistle from outside cut through the moment. Takoda's warning signal. Riders approaching. Multiple horses. Close. Nashkahi moved to help Sahale stand. She leaned on him, trembling but determined. Takoda burst back in. 3 riders. Maybe more behind them. "We go now." Nashkahi nodded. "Into the ravine. We'll lose them in the dark." As they stepped out into the night, the wind carried the distant clatter of hooves and men shouting orders. The hunt had begun. And for the first time in 9 years, Nashkahi Graywolf would not run alone. He would fight for the woman fate had dropped into his life like a storm. The 3 of them slipped into the dark ravine just as the first group of riders reached the ridge above the cabin. Hooves thundered against the stone, echoing down the canyon walls. Nashkahi urged Sahale forward, keeping her steady as they descended the narrow path. Takoda looked back once. The ranchers had torches, their orange glow spreading like fire ants across the cliff edge. He whispered harshly, "They're checking the cabin first. We have minutes at best." "We don't need minutes," Nashkahi said quietly. "We need silence." The ravine floor was cool beneath their boots, the sand still holding the night's breath. Weya, the mare, and the bay stallion followed close, their movements controlled, trained for stealth. Nashkahi led them deeper between towering walls of red stone, the moonlight only slipping through in thin silver veins. Sahale leaned against him, breathing carefully. She was tougher than she looked. Her steps were steady despite the pain. "This place," she murmured, looking around. "I know this ravine. My people used it generations ago, before we were pushed north." Nashkahi's eyes flicked to her. "Then you know the end of it." "Yes," she pointed weakly. "There's a hidden path to the upper mesas past the old Serpent Rock." Takoda frowned. "Serpent Rock? That thing collapsed years ago." "Part of it," Sahale corrected. "There's still a gap wide enough for one horse at a time." Nashkahi didn't question her familiarity. He didn't need to. She had the voice of someone who had traveled this land her whole life. And tonight, that knowledge could mean survival. Behind them, a torch flared brightly on the ridge. A rider screamed an order. Another fired a gunshot into the air. They'd found the empty cabin. Takoda tensed. "They know." Nashkahi grabbed his shoulder. "Move." They pushed forward, weaving through a maze of jutting rocks and twist-like sandstone spires. The smell of juniper brushed the air. Coyotes howled far off, disturbed by the human chase slicing through their territory. Just as the ravine began to narrow, Sahale stumbled. Nashkahi caught her instantly. "You need to rest." "No," she said firmly. "If we stop now, we die." "The ranchers. They won't retreat." Takoda exhaled sharply. "Those men aren't ranchers anymore. They're mercenaries with badges carved from dirt." Nashkahi nodded grimly. "Men who believe land becomes theirs if they kill enough people on it." Sahale's voice lowered. "They came after my tribe because we refused to sell passage rights through our land. My father said no. They decided to take it anyway." Nashkahi felt heat rise in his chest, a quiet, ancient anger. He had known men like that, fought them, lost nearly everything to them. Now they dared touch this woman, this tribe, this land. He tightened his grip on Sahale. "We'll get you to your people. I promise." Her eyes glistened not from pain, but something like hope, fragile as the night wind. A sudden crack behind them shattered the moment-splintering wood. Gunshot. Takoda spun. "They're shooting the corral posts. They'll trace us through the ravine." Nashkahi's voice stayed steady. "Then we reach the serpent rock before they find the bottleneck." They quickened their pace. The ravine walls began to curl inward, forming a natural choke point. Massive boulders blocked most of the path except a thin slit on the right. The serpent rock stood tall ahead, what remained of it. Once a stone shaped like a rising snake, now half collapsed from a lightning strike years earlier. Sahale pointed. "There the gap." Nashkahi guided the horses while Takoda squeezed through first. Once they were past the narrow slit, the land opened into a sloping trail leading upward toward the shadowed mesas. Below them, the sound of hooves swelled like a rising storm. Takoda cursed under his breath. "They're fast." Sahale turned, her face strained. "We need to block the gap, even for a moment." "There's nothing heavy enough," Takoda argued. "There is," Nashka said. His eyes drifted to a large wedge of stone perched dangerously above the gap dislodged decades ago, held in place by a tangle of roots and smaller rocks. Takoda understood instantly. "If we break it loose, we seal the passage." "For hours," Nashkahi confirmed. "Or forever," Sahale whispered. Nashkahi stepped forward, jaw set. "Takoda, get her up the slope." "I'll handle this." Sahale grabbed his wrist suddenly, surprising him with her strength. "You can't stay behind." He met her gaze, still and deep. "I won't die tonight." Before she could answer, he pulled free and scaled the rock shelf quickly. Takoda tugged her gently. "Come on." "Trust him." Sahale allowed herself to be led, but her eyes never left Nashkahi's silhouette against the moon. Below, the first rider entered the ravine. Nashkahi planted his feet, raised his knife, and drove it into the root holding the giant slab of rock. The canyon rumbled. The rock shifted. The riders shouted. Nashkahi drew one last breath, and the stone began to fall. The stone slab tumbled with a thunderous roar, crashing into the narrow ravine below and sending a cloud of dust spiraling into the night air. The riders' shouts cut off abruptly, replaced by the echo of hooves skidding against rock. Nashkahi exhaled slowly, sweat glistening on his bare chest as moonlight illuminated his taut muscles and long black hair plastered to his shoulders. For a moment, silence claimed the canyon broken only by distant coyotes and the low groan of shifting stone. Above the gap, Takoda helped Sahale steady herself on the slope. She leaned on him heavily, her breath coming in short, measured gasps. "You saved us," she said softly, awe threading her voice. Takoda smiled, but his eyes remained wary. "We're not safe yet. They'll regroup." Sahale's dark eyes swept across the shadowed mesas, taking in the narrow paths, the twisted juniper trees, and the jagged rock formations. "The plateau ahead. It's where my people sometimes camp. But it's exposed. They'll see us if we're not careful." Nashkahi crested the ledge behind them, dusting his hands and adjusting the bone necklace around his neck. "We'll move silently," he said, his voice low but commanding. "No one touches Sahale again." Sahale caught his gaze and nodded. There was a quiet fire in her eyes now, a mix of respect, gratitude, and curiosity emotions she didn't dare voice in words yet. The three moved upward, climbing the rugged incline toward the mesas. Each step was a careful calculation, the jagged stone threatening to twist an ankle or break a boot sole. Takoda led the horses, ensuring they didn't slip or spook. Nashkahi brought up the rear, eyes scanning every shadow, every subtle movement. Halfway across the plateau, Sahale paused, lowering herself to a flat rock. "I can rest here a moment. The climb has opened old wounds." She winced as she adjusted her shoulder, bruised from the horse ride and the rough terrain. Nashkahi knelt beside her, offering water from a leather skin. She took it gratefully, sipping slowly, then returned the skin. "You are strong," he said quietly. "Stronger than most men I've seen survive what you've endured." Her lips twitched faintly. "Strength is survival. Nothing more. My people taught me that well." Takoda frowned. "Your people? How far ahead are they? Do we know if they're safe?" Sahale's gaze darkened. "Some fled upriver. Some were captured. My father, I don't know. The land has changed too much. The outsiders come in waves. We are shadows." Nashkahi felt a tight knot in his chest. Shadows. That was what he had been hiding from 2 years of living as a shadow, away from the lands and people he once loved. Now he had a choice: remain hidden or rise again. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of horses and men shouting far below. Nashkahi pressed a finger to his lips. "They're regrouping. But they won't risk the ravine again tonight." Sahale's voice was quiet but tense. "We can't stop until we reach the hidden spring. The stream above it. There's a canyon that leads to a place my father calls the Whispering Rocks. It's safe, at least. Safer than anywhere else." Nashkahi nodded. "Then that is our path. Takoda, keep the horses close. Sahale, you stay between us. I'll handle what's behind us." The moon cast long, shifting shadows across the plateau as they moved. Every step required alertness. The desert offered no mercy for mistakes. Rocks crumbled unexpectedly, loose sand threatened footing, and jagged stones scraped arms and legs. But Nashkahi led with a steady, silent authority, a presence that anchored them both. Suddenly, Sahale froze, her eyes darting toward a clump of twisted mesquite ahead. "Wait," she whispered. "I see." "Smoke." Nashkahi's brow furrowed. "Smokers or fire?" She shook her head. "I can't tell, but it's near the river bend. Someone is there. Someone waiting." Takoda tightened his grip on the reins. "We can't risk it. Move around or they'll spot us." Nashkahi considered, scanning the plateau for cover. "The only path is narrow, but we can hug the rocks and avoid the low ridges. Stay close. Silence. Every breath counts." The three of them pressed on, shadows among shadows, hearts beating in unison with the night. The wind carried whispers of the past, of blood spilled, homes burned, and lands stolen. And yet, amidst it all, Nashkahi felt a strange warmth beside him. Sahale's presence was quiet but commanding, unafraid of him despite knowing nothing about the man who had chosen to protect her. Up ahead, the hidden spring waited, trickling silver under the moon. Nashkahi knew this was more than survival now. This was a crossing between old wounds and new beginnings, and somewhere deep in the night, he realized that the woman at his side was no longer just someone to protect. She was a reason to keep fighting. The hidden spring shimmered silver beneath the moon, a small oasis cradled by jagged rocks and twisted juniper. Nashki motioned for Sahale and Takoda to halt. The air was still, almost sacred, broken only by the gentle gurgle of water trickling over stone. For the first time in hours, silence offered them a moment of respite. Sahale sank to the ground, her legs trembling. She cupped the cool water in her hands, letting it trickle over her face and arms. "I've not tasted water like this in," she murmured. Her voice carried both relief and sorrow, a reminder of the life she had lost. Takoda knelt beside her, offering her a small bundle of cloth. "We'll let you rest, but not long. They'll find us if we linger." Nashkahi stood on a nearby rock, scanning the plateau and the mesas beyond. His eyes were sharp, calculating. The moonlight revealed the contours of the distant ridges, the hidden paths, and the low shadows that could conceal enemies. "We are not safe yet," he said. "The men who chased us. They will not give up tonight. Sahale looked up at him, her dark eyes catching the silver glow. Then we need a plan. Nashkahi crouched, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. We make one path predictable and the other invisible. Takoda, you know the upper canyon? Takoda nodded. There's a narrow trail leading through the Whispering Rocks. Few know it exists. Fewer dare cross it at night. Then that is our way, Nashkahi decided. He moved to Sahale. You'll ride with me. Takoda, guide the horses and cover our rear. Every shadow could hold a gun tonight. Sahale hesitated, studying Nashkahi's determined face. You're risking yourself for me. I don't know if I deserve that. He met her gaze, steady and unwavering. Deserve has nothing to do with it. Survival does. And tonight, I protect you. She nodded silently, a faint warmth in her chest despite exhaustion. Takoda helped Sahale onto the horse Nashkahi had chosen, the Dunmar, steady and sure-footed. Nashkahi mounted way up behind her. The two moved slowly at first, careful not to alert the unseen pursuers below. The plateau narrowed, cliffs rising sharply on either side, shadows thickening like ink dot as they progressed. Sahale clutched Nashkahi's waist lightly, her fear mingling with something else, a curiosity, an unspoken question about the man who had lived alone in these harsh lands. He felt it, but did not acknowledge it. Focused eyes never wavered. Halfway through the trail, a distant shout cut through the night. Nashkahi froze, signaling the group to halt. Voices carried across the canyon, rough and angry. Torches glinted far below. The men had regrouped faster than expected. They're splitting, Takoda whispered, tense. Two groups, one behind us, one cutting off the plateau exit. Nashkahi's jaw tightened. Then we split too. I take Sahale through the upper ledge. Takoda distracts them. We'll meet at the cove beyond the Whispering Rocks. Sahale's hands tightened on his waist. Split? He shook his head slightly. You trust him, don't you? Her eyes flickered toward Takoda, who gave a solemn nod. I trust him, she admitted softly. Nashkahi guided the Mari along a narrow ledge where even a misstep could send them tumbling. Sahale's breath hitched once as she balanced herself against him, but the steadiness of his grip reassured her. Every step brought them closer to the hidden canyon, where rocks arched overhead and the night air carried only the faint whisper of the spring below dot behind them. Takoda kicked up dust and rocks to distract the pursuers, throwing their senses into confusion. Shouts and gunfire echoed through the canyon, but Nashkahi pressed forward, ears straining for any sign of immediate danger. At last, the trail dipped sharply into a shadowed crevice. The Whispering Rocks. Moonlight fractured through the high arches, casting eerie reflections on the stone walls. The place was sacred, almost holy in its stillness, a labyrinth carved by wind and time. Nashkahi dismounted carefully, helping Sahale to the ground. She looked around in awe at the natural stone cathedral. Your people knew this land intimately, she murmured. It's beautiful. He only nodded. Beauty and danger often walk together in the desert, and tonight they had been tested by both. Takoda appeared moments later, leading the horses quietly through the shadows. All clear for now, he said, relief in his voice. Sahale turned to Nashkahi, her eyes catching his in the moonlight. I don't know how to thank you. He studied her for a long moment, the canyon silence stretching between them. You don't need to. Just survive. That is enough. But even as he said it, Nashkahi felt something stirring deep in him, a connection he hadn't felt in years. A promise forming quietly in the shadows of the Whispering Rocks. Tonight. The woman at his side had changed everything. Above them. The desert wind whispered secrets of the past and promises of the future, and for the first time in a long time, Nashkahi Graywolf allowed himself to imagine a life where he was not alone. The Whispering Rocks offered sanctuary, but Nashkahi knew it would not last. The desert was vast, but hunters could be relentless. From the narrow crevices, he scanned the horizon, alert to every flicker of movement. Takoda tended to the horses quietly, his eyes darting toward distant mesas. Sahale leaned against a smooth stone, exhaustion heavy in her limbs, yet her eyes were sharp, tracking every shadow. "They'll come," Nashkahi said, his voice low but unwavering. "They won't stop until they find us or you." Sahale's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we fight or hide?" Nashkahi crouched beside her, studying her face. "Both. First we hide. Then we fight if they find us." Takoda nodded, bringing a small pouch of herbs from his pack. "Smoke from these can mask our trail for a while. It'll buy us time." Sahale watched, curiosity blending with caution. "You both know these lands like they are part of you." He gave a faint smile. "We survive by knowing them. The land does not forgive mistakes." Together, they set up a small fire in a shallow depression, the smoke curling upward in thin wisps, hiding the scent of their passage from anyone following. Nashkahi instructed them to stay quiet, every movement deliberate. The wind carried their whispers away, but danger lurked in the canyon's folds. Hours passed in tense silence. Nashkahi kept a watch at the edge of the crevice, his silhouette muscular and rigid against the silver glow of moonlight. The desert night was alive with distant coyote calls and the occasional crackle of loose stone. Sahale had grown quiet, observing him, perhaps seeing the life of a man who had spent years alone, honed, cautious, and fiercely protective. Takoda broke the stillness with a low voice. "I see torches again, far below. They're scouting the plateau edges." Nashkahi exhaled softly. "Not close enough. Yet. But we must move before dawn." Sahale glanced toward him. "You've survived out here alone for years. Why? Why hide?" He hesitated, jaw tight. "I buried my past. I lost too many. People I loved. I swore to stay away from the world that took them." Her eyes softened, filled with understanding yet carrying her own shadows. "And now?" "Now," he said, looking at her, "I have a reason to keep moving forward." She didn't answer, only nodded slightly. The firelight danced across her face, casting shadows that emphasized both her beauty and the pain she carried. When the first hints of dawn tinted the sky pink and gold, Nashkahi moved them onward. The Whispering Rocks gave way to a narrow trail leading to a hidden canyon above the river. Every step was precise, every motion careful. Nashkahi guided the horses, then helped Sahale across a jagged rock formation. Takoda scouted ahead, signaling when the path was clear. Halfway along the canyon, a sudden commotion erupted below. Voices, shouts, hooves, and the clash of metal. Nashkahi crouched low, pressing Sahale against the stone wall. "They've found a path up," he whispered. Sahale gripped his arm. "Then we fight?" Nashkahi nodded. "If they reach us, but only if we must." Takoda signaled them forward, pointing to a series of boulders that could serve as a natural barrier. Nashkahi studied the landscape, muscles tensing. There was no room for error. "Stay behind me," he instructed Sahale. "Trust me." She did, her hand resting lightly on his waist as they moved together. Nashkahi led with the precision of a predator and the caution of a man who had lost everything once. Takoda brought up the rear, guiding the horses quietly through the rocky terrain. Suddenly, a lone rider appeared at the edge of the plateau, torch raised. Nashkahi froze, then silently dropped to the ground, dragging Sahale with him behind a boulder. The man shouted, scanning the cliffs, but the smoke from their fire earlier masked their trail. Hours passed like this, moving, hiding, moving again. Finally, as the sun rose higher, the river below shimmered with light. Nashkahi guided them to a secluded bend, a small cove hidden by trees and rock formations. Here, the water ran clear, fresh, and untouched. Sahale dropped to her knees, cupping the water in both hands. "We made it," she whispered. Her eyes, dark and thoughtful, met Nashkahi's. "Thanks to you." He remained quiet, letting her words hang in the warm morning air. This was more than survival. This was the first step toward trust, toward connection, toward a life neither of them had expected in the vast, unforgiving desert. Takoda finally relaxed, leading the horses to a safe spot. "We can rest here," he said softly. Nashkahi watched Sahale, the woman who had become both his responsibility and something more. The desert had tested them, but in her presence he felt a stirring he had buried for years. The canyon, the rocks, the river, they all bore witness to something new. A promise not yet spoken, but understood. Survival had brought them together. And in the quiet morning, Nashkahi Graywolf realized this fight was only the beginning of danger, of trust, and perhaps of a life he thought he had lost long ago. The cove was quiet, but Nashkahi knew better than to trust silence. The river's gentle murmur did little to calm the tension coiling in his muscles. He stood atop a rock, arms crossed, chest bare, the bone necklace catching the morning light. Sahale sat nearby, her fingers trailing through the cool water, and Takoda tended to the horses, keeping watch for any sign of danger. "This place? It's safe, isn't it?" Sahale asked softly, her voice carrying the faint tremor of exhaustion. Nashkahi's gaze swept the surrounding canyon. "For now. The river bends, the cliffs hide us, but danger can appear anywhere in these lands. That's why we remain alert." She looked up at him, her dark eyes thoughtful. "You've lived all this time alone. Yet you saved me, guided me through the worst night of my life." "Why?" He exhaled slowly, jaw tight. "Because survival is more than staying alive. It's protecting what matters. And tonight, you mattered." Sahale's gaze softened, but she didn't speak. There was something unspoken between them, something neither had dared to name yet. Takoda returned from checking the horses, brushing dust from his pants. "Father, we can't stay long. The men pursuing us will realize we vanished from the river's path by noon." Nashkahi nodded. "I know, but we've gained something tonight time, knowledge, and a chance to act. That's enough." They moved along the riverbank carefully, Nashkahi guiding Sahale and keeping her protected. Her steps were steadier now, more confident, though fatigue lingered. "I never thought I'd see the desert this way," she said quietly. "Beautiful, but dangerous." "It tests everyone," Nashkahi replied, his voice calm. "Some survive, some don't. Tonight we survived together." Hours passed, the sun climbing higher and warming the rocks. The distant sound of riders' torches, no longer visible, was replaced by the whisper of the river, birds calling and the wind threading through the cliffs. The world seemed to breathe again, but Nashkahi remained vigilant. As they reached a natural alcove, shielded from view by boulders and overhanging trees, Sahale stopped. She looked around, then finally turned to Nashkahi. "I've been running my whole life. From men, from wars, from strangers who wanted what wasn't theirs. But with you, I feel like I can finally stop running." Nashkahi's heart thumped, a sensation he had not felt in years. He knelt beside her, letting the morning light illuminate her face. "You don't need to run anymore," he said softly. "Not with me. Not with Takoda. Not tonight." Her hand rested on his arm. "And you? What about you? You've been alone so long. What does this change for you?" He looked away briefly, to the river, to the canyon, to the horizon where danger could still appear. It changes everything. I've been a shadow in these lands for 9 years, hiding, surviving, alone. But you remind me that living isn't just surviving. It's protecting, connecting, and trusting again. For the first time in nearly a decade, Nashkahi allowed himself a quiet smile. Sahale's presence stirred something in him: hope, courage, and a tether to a life he thought was gone. Takoda spoke, breaking the tender silence. We need to decide our next move. We can't stay in one place, but the mesa trails ahead will lead to your people, Sahale. If we travel carefully, we can reach the white stone band before sunset. Sahale nodded, determination replacing fatigue. Then we go, together. Nashkahi stood, brushing dust from his chest, and offered his hand to her. She took it, and the contact was electric, not in a way of fear, but of connection, trust, and mutual understanding. The three set off along the hidden trails, winding through the cliffs and high mesas. Nashkahi led, alert to every sound, every shadow. Behind him, Takoda and Sahale followed closely, the horses guided silently. The desert stretched endlessly, but with each step, the sense of danger faded, replaced by cautious hope. By late afternoon, the river widened, and the distant smoke of a small village came into view. Nashkahi's heart tightened. This was it, their destination, the place where Sahale's people could offer protection, and where he could finally consider a life beyond isolation. Sahale turned to him. "You'll come with me?" Nashkahi met her gaze. "I've been alone for too long. But I don't want to be alone anymore. Not when there's something worth fighting for." A gentle smile curved her lips. Then we moved forward. Together. Takoda led the horses down the final slope, his eyes scanning the surroundings, but there was no sign of pursuit. The desert, which had tested them all night, now seemed calm, almost welcoming. As the trio approached the village of the Whitestone Band, Nashkahi felt a weight lift from his chest. 9 years of solitude, pain, and shadows were behind him. Ahead was survival, connection, and perhaps a chance at something more than existence, a life with purpose, love, and trust. For the first time, Nashkahi Graywolf, the lone Apache man, allowed himself to believe that danger, struggle, and survival had led him not to isolation, but to the woman who had changed everything. The river sparkled, the cliff stood tall, and the desert whispered its ancient approval. And at last, Nashkahi, Takoda, and Sahale stepped forward into a future neither of them had dared imagine. Together.